This is the Cliff Yates Show. Personal growth, motivation, inspiration, and philosophies for a great life.
Hey everybody, this is the Cliff Yates Show. You're in the right place. And today we're talking about New York City. And I've wanted to talk about this for a couple months now. We went to New York in December, mid-December for Christmas time. And then we went back a couple weeks later to spend New Year's Eve in Manhattan. We were a little hesitant on our first trip to New York last December because obviously the videos that we're showing in the news don't lie. The crime is obviously rampant in New York. But when we got there, surprisingly, and obviously this was not reflective of what was going on in the whole city or the whole state for that matter, but Manhattan itself was pretty clean and we didn't see hardly any homeless people. I don't know what they did with them. Obviously, they moved them out. They had really influxed Manhattan with a lot of police presence everywhere on every block. And so we felt very safe. We went to several Broadway shows. We were out late at night, a couple nights for dinner. And after some Broadway shows, we were out to 10, 11 midnight and felt perfectly safe. We rode the subway. Matter of fact, we went to Brooklyn Botanical Gardens for a Christmas display, and we were at least adjacent, not to a good area of New York, but we're on the subway. There was a lot of young ladies traveling alone. The subway stations were clean, and there wasn't the usual panhandling, people playing music and asking for donations. They had pretty much cleaned out all the stations. One of the nice things I did like that has been upgraded in the subway system is now you don't need a Metro card. Now you can just tap your credit card and it automatically charges your credit card, and then you go into the subway. And every time you take a ride, you just tap your credit card. So no longer do you have to buy the 3-day pass or 7-day pass or have to load up a Metro card, not knowing exactly how many times you're going to use it on your trip. And so that was a good upgrade. So we were so happy with our Christmas trip, we decided to go back for New Year's, and New Year's was packed. Now, we didn't spend it, in the corrals. We had a package already pre-purchased at one of the local restaurants. And so we had a great time, even in New Year's, but there was a big police presence. Even our hotel, where we have a timeshare at the Hilton at 6th Avenue and 53rd Street, there must have been... just in the hotel itself, there must have been 12 to 15 NYPD people in plain clothes and uniform. And so I can imagine the amount of overtime in the police presence in Manhattan was significant. But we had a great time in New York, but we were hesitant to go. If I go back to my first experiences in New York City, I was a police officer. I was a deputy sheriff in upstate New York. As maybe you know by my book, Deputy, I worked near Rochester out of Geneseo, New York for a small sheriff's department, the Livingston County Sheriff's Department, 50 deputies, 20 road deputies, very small department. And I started there full time when I was 21. And I mean, it was a rural patrol area. And so I grew up in that area, which is about 400 or 500 miles from New York City. So here I was in the sheriff's department now for 3-4 years, and I became infatuated, obsessed. I had a dominating thought in my mind that I wanted to get to a large police agency. So I was applying at New York City, Los Angeles, LA Sheriff's Department, LAPD, Houston PD, Fort Lauderdale PD. And my sheriff at the time had been out to LA, and he really loved the LA Sheriff's Department. That he thought they were the best in the country. He says, I'll give you time off the test, and if you don't like it or you don't make it, you can always come back here. So I had a safe landing if things didn't work out. But at the same time that I was applying to everywhere, I had an appointment in May of, would have been 83, to take the NYPD test in New York City. So here I was, 25 years old, and going to New York City for the first time. My parents never wanted to go. That wasn't their thing, and I had never thought about going prior to this. So here I was, maybe a 5-hour car drive away, a train ride, 8 hours and 45 minutes maybe by plane. And this was my first trip to New York City. This is 1983. So this was just prior to, well, it was quite a few years prior to Rudy Giuliani taking over as mayor, as a Republican mayor. So when I got to New York City in 83 to take the test, Times Square was still peep shows and it was not safe. And so I went to New York on the train to take the test with my mom and my aunt in 1983. And the test was, I'll never forget, it was the Norman Thomas High School on Lexington Avenue in Manhattan. And we took the train down to New York City. It was about an 8-hour train ride, and we had a great time. And I took the test, and we went down to Macy's, and we looked around Manhattan. And but we had no fear of our safety or our lives, although they probably were in danger at the time. If you go back to 1983 and the crime stats, you'll see it probably wasn't the safest time to go to New York. But we had a great time in New York City. I took the New York City police test and came back, and I had applied at the LA Sheriff's Department, and I received word that I could fly to New York, and LA Sheriff had an out-of-state program where I could go to LA and take 4 aspects of the test all at the same time. So I took the written, right then you pass the written that day. You take the physical agility that day, and if you pass, then they schedule you the next day for an oral interview. And if you pass that, the next day, you take your first phase medical. Then I flew back to New York, and then you're assigned a background investigator, and that takes several months. So I got notified in November if I wanted to continue. I could either get hired, go into the academy, and then take the polygraph exam, but then if I didn't pass it, I would be out. But so, my rule was, and I think my parents instilled this in me, that, you don't leave your current job until you get your next job. So I wanted to make sure that I was in. So I flew out. The other option was to fly out to LA, take the polygraph exam, which I did. I passed the polygraph, and then I came back to Livingston County in upstate New York. Not sure if I was still going to take the job when offered, but I had completed the process now, and here it is, December, and I had taken the written NYPD exam, and I hadn't been even gotten the results yet. I was offered the job in LA before I got the results back for the NYPD written test. And so I was already in the process of moving to LA when I got notified. I passed the NYPD test, but I was on band 3. So they would have to go through band 1 first, band 2, and then get to band 3 before I got hired. So I was in the LA Sheriff's Department, and I was in the jail system. In LA Sheriff, you got to have 2 assignments, jail, custody, and then patrol. So I had to go to custody first, and I was hating working in the jail. Here I'd worked patrol for Livingston County for 5 years, and now to be in custody, working in the jail, to me it was like being in jail. So in my 3rd year, I was ready to quit. And I got notified by NYPD in 1987 that if I wanted to, I could go back to New York and put my name back on the list. And I decided to do that. So I flew back to New York, and I talked to a man at the academy, a member of the department. He talked me out of it. He said, listen, this is not the place for you. You want to stay in LA. You do not want to be here in New York. And so I had been up all night. I couldn't get a hotel. I had no sleep. And I said, the heck with it. I'm staying in LA. And I flew back. And within a few months, I was going to patrol. And it all worked out. And in the end, I'm glad I didn't get the NYPD job, because I would have wanted to work for sure in Manhattan. I probably would have been working during 9/11, probably would have got killed during that time. So in the end, it's probably a godsend that I didn't get hired by NYPD at the time, 1987. So I stayed in LA. Now I flew back home 1995-ish to go to a class reunion, spent a night in New York, and that's when I saw my first Broadway show in New York, and it was called Blood Brothers. Petula Clark was in it, and so weren't the Cassidy brothers. David and Sean Cassidy, David from the Partridge Family. So they were in the show called Blood Brothers, and I loved it. I loved the whole Broadway scene. Here I was by myself, seeing my first Broadway show, and I just loved it. Intermission, outside in front, guy on the saxophone, the smells of New York. I loved it and had a great time. Fast forward, I meet my current wife in 95, and in 1999, we take our first trip to New York City. So we go to New York City together, and she loves New York. She loves New York, maybe because she's Cuban. She loves the fast-paced people. People are, they know where they're going, and they're getting there, and they're getting there fast. They talk fast, and she didn't, and I didn't. We don't find people to be in New York rude at all. It's just they're on a mission. Usually people are going somewhere, they know where they're going, and they're in a hurry to get there. So we had I just was so in love with the fact that the person I was in love with loved New York. So we had two loves going there at the same time. So from 1999 until the pandemic of 2020, except for 1 year, we went every year back to New York during Christmas time, spent four days to a week during Christmas, just enjoying New York City, seeing Broadway shows. We both love to see Broadway shows. As a matter of fact, in 1990, I guess it was 99, maybe it was just before that. Whenever Rent was first on Broadway, we saw Rent. Matter of fact, that was our first Broadway show together, was Rent. Adina Menzel was in it, Tate Diggs, and so we have just seen such great shows in New York, such great Broadway shows. We saw Wicked there twice. So we've seen it 3 times, twice in New York, 1 in L.A. Didn't like the L.A. show too much. Usually the touring, well, it's the cast. The cast is not the same as the New York cast usually. So we loved, because when we saw Wicked, it was Adina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth. So we had the top of the line cast when we saw Wicked in New York. But every time we go to New York, we see 4, 5 Broadway shows, and if it's on the weekend, we're going to see a matinee and we'll see a show that night. So we've had great trips to New York. And of course, now I had taken the test for New York City in 1983. And when I went back in 1995 to see my first Broadway show, Rudy Giuliani had just become mayor around that time, 94, 95. And so things were already changing in New York. Because when I went in 83 to take the test, we went down to Grand Central Station. And there was just homeless laying all over the place. And like I said, Times Square was still peep shows and people begging and 3-card Monte. And it wasn't the beautiful theater district that we have today there in Times Square with lights and billboards. 1983 was still strip clubs and drug dealing and high crime. And so when I went back in 95, Giuliani is now cleaning up the city. It's crazy different. And by the time my wife and I get to the city, 99, the city is beautiful. We have a great time in Manhattan, never had any trouble. And we continued to, matter of fact, we finally, people always say to us, well, we'd like to go to New York too. We'd like to go with these guys sometime. And we always say, come with us to New York. And nobody ever did. And we finally, I had a couple who worked with me inside the jail at the LA Sheriff's Department, some fellow sergeants after I was promoted. And they said, hey, we want to go to New York. And they followed through with it. And they went with us for almost 10 years. As a matter of fact, they got married in New York. So, and they had 2 friends come with them. So we had a couple of years where we had a group of 6 to 8 people who traveled to New York with us. So our New York experience was great. And when I started playing tennis, and just about maybe 6 years ago, one of my wants was to go to the U.S. Open. So normally we went during Christmas time, And so around 2017, 2018, we went to the U.S. Open in New York. Another great time, great experience. A little bit different in the summertime, not as crowded. We don't have the Christmas crowds. The tourists are there always, but specifically there for the U.S. Open, but not as many as there are during Christmas time, and so much easier to get around because we don't have to. It was kind of great not having to put on the winter coats, bundle up before you hit the streets of New York, just to be there in the summer and wearing light clothes. We had a great time. So far, all of our experiences have been great in New York City. Even our recent trip to New York, and obviously crime is out of control with that DA, and you see what's happening on the news, but they definitely have focused their efforts on Manhattan to really flush Manhattan with police presence. And I felt very, very safe in Manhattan last December that we went. So all of our trips. Now we went, and my wife and I would go in '99. I know in 2000, we are seeing the Statue of Liberty, and we have a picture with the Twin Towers behind us. And we had decided the next year we were going to go through the Twin Towers, and we wanted to go eat in a restaurant called Windows on the World. And so we had planned that in 2000, and here 2001 goes, and the towers go down, 9/11. And now we went back in 2000, actually December of 2000. We went January of 2002. So we end up, when the towers was just still 2 holes in the ground, they weren't even beginning to clean up yet. And we went to the church and saw all the patches, that church right next to Ground Zero. And of course, since it took over 10 plus years, but now we have the Freedom Tower, and that's something you have to see in the memorial ponds where the Twin Towers stood. And you can go down into the holes where the museum is, where the police cars are and the fire trucks. It's quite emotional to see that. You're going to feel such emotion when you see it. If you haven't already, please do. But so we did not go to New York, obviously, in 2020, 21, and then so 22 we went back. So the third year. So our experiences have been great every time, even post-pandemic. Let me know what your experiences have been in New York City, if you've gone recently at all, or even before. Leave in the comments. I want to know your experience. Another great thing about New York City is it's so easy to get around. You can't get lost in New York. The subway system is easy. Once you learn the subway system, you don't need to take taxis anymore. You just take the subway. And they're pretty easy to learn, the subway routes. There's obviously apps that you can use. And of course, now that you don't need a Metro card, it's real easy to take. But these apps will tell you just put in where you're going. It'll tell you what stations to get on, what stations to get off. The only thing that can be confusing in the subway is during regular business times, pretty much every subway route is local. They'll stop at all the local stops in Manhattan. But during other hours, you can get on the express, which will bypass the local stops and just continue on either to Brooklyn or somewhere a long ways away. That can happen. Otherwise, if you get lost or miss a stop, you can just get off, get back on the next train going in the opposite direction. And all of the streets, you're on an island. Manhattan is an island. So you can only go so far, right? You got around, 12th Avenue to the west, all the way to 1st Avenue on the east. So all the avenues run east and west, and all the streets run north. No, let me take that back. No, all the avenues run north and south. All the streets run east and west. So you start to know where everything is. So 57th Street, 58th, 59th Street, you're going to be you're butted right up against Central Park, right? And then you take all the way downtown to 1st Street, you're going to be down to where the ferry goes to Long Island, to the Statue of Liberty. So whatever your street you're on, so if you're on 30th Street and you're going to 59th Street, then you're going uptown. And if you're at 59th Street and you're going to 30th Street, then you're going downtown. And so these subway lines will be kind of, some are located central in Manhattan, some are on the east side, some are on the west side, and then there's a couple, I think the L or the 7th will transverse across Manhattan, and I think the 7 goes across into Brooklyn. So I think it's either the L or the 7th we take over for the... So you can take the subway, Yankee Stadium, take you right there. The subway to where the U.S. Open tennis is, Arthur Ashe Stadium, it's right there. Get off at the subway, there you go. You're at the tennis stadium. So we haven't been to Yankee Stadium yet, but we want to do that. But so it's very easy to get around. We had a timeshare in Las Vegas for the Hilton, and we always wanted to have one in New York. But the Hilton that we really liked to stay at was at 57th. I'm sorry, it was at 6th Avenue, having the Americas, and between 53rd and 54th Streets. And the Hilton Grand Vacations, the Hilton Club of New York, which owns 2 floors there in that Hilton, they had a 99-year lease, and there was only about 10 years left on those leases. So we didn't want to buy there because we want to leave this to our kids. So the only option was to buy up at 59th Street, which was a property we stayed at. We didn't like it. So eventually, though, they added another floor at the Hilton, 6th and 53rd, and we were able to we were able to sell the Vegas and buy there in New York. So we were real happy to buy there because we love that location at 6th and 53rd. You can walk to Central Park. It's only a couple blocks. You can walk to the theater district, no problem. I mean, we like walking, so my wife frequently walks down to Macy's, 34th Street and 6th. And if she's tired, doesn't want to walk that far, she'll take the subway back, or she'll walk back. And it's a quick walk to Rockefeller Center. And so we're kind of centrally located, and now we've been going there so many years that we kind of know, we know this restaurant's at 252 West 52nd Street, so we know that's between 6th and 7th Avenue. It's only on 1 block south of where we are at the Hilton. So starting to know the locations and the street locations, so it's easy to determine how long it's going to take us to walk there from our main headquarters when we go there. So, you know what? Don't hesitate to give New York a try, and, use your head, be cautious, but New York, still a great place to go. I wouldn't live there. People are moving there to where we live in Florida, the free state of Florida. But New York for us is still great for a 4, 5, 6 day trip. No longer, but for a quick trip for Christmas time, New York still beautiful during Christmas. You can't beat that atmosphere during Christmas. And we had a great time in New York. One time we had a great time for New Year's Eve. One time we actually did stand in the corrals to see the ball drop. And we were there from 2 in the afternoon until midnight. So we were 10 hours there. And once you're locked in those corrals, you can't get in and out. And so it's very difficult. But this year we didn't do that. We went to a restaurant deal. We're probably going to do the same thing next year. So don't miss New York. Christmas time, New Year's Eve. You still can't beat it. Use your head. Use caution. They're really emphasizing police safety and police presence in Manhattan. So I don't know what they're doing with the homeless or the mentally ill, but I'll tell you, this last trip, we hardly saw any homeless. And in fact, the streets were very clean. Cleaner than in some previous years. So hopefully it's going to get back to being pristine as it once was, but still safe, we think, during Christmas, New Year's. Give it a try. Don't live in fear. Hey, that's my experience in New York City, and so I'd love to hear what yours is. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel. The Cliff Yates Podcast is on the YouTube channel. If you're watching or listening there, please subscribe. If you're on one of the podcast platforms, please subscribe to the show. Leave a comment. It helps in the algorithms. It tells the computer, hey, people are interacting with the show. Show it to more people. You're great. I love you. Check in for the next episode.